My name is Aaron. I'm 29 years old, and I've been hunting since I was 15. Growing up in rural Tennessee, the woods were basically a second home to me. Long hours alone out there in the dark and cold never once made me uneasy. I knew how to read the forest, trusted my instincts, and genuinely loved being out there by myself. That's exactly why what happened 2 years ago hit me so hard. Because it came from a place I always felt completely safe. It was late November, peak deer season. I had planned a solo 3-day trip deep into a section of the Cherokee National Forest I had hunted a couple times before. Well off any marked trail, the kind of area most people never bother reaching. You had to know the terrain to find it. I texted my brother my exact GPS coordinates before heading in Thursday morning and told him the usual, if you don't hear from me by Sunday, send someone. First day was completely normal. Cold, quiet, good deer movement in the afternoon. I made camp near a narrow creek, got a fire going after dark, and slept soundly. Nothing felt off whatsoever. The second day started fine too. I was in my stand before sunrise and stayed up there well into the afternoon watching a natural funnel between two ridges. Around 4 p.m. I climbed down and headed back toward camp. That's when I first saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line maybe 40 yards up the trail was a figure. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothing, no hunting gear, no pack, no orange vest, just standing completely still facing in my direction. I assumed it was another hunter and raised a hand and called out a hello. No response. I called out again. Nothing. The figure just stood there with its arms hanging straight down, completely motionless. I stood there long enough that it started feeling genuinely wrong. Then slowly, without any natural body movement, it turned and stepped back into the trees. I want to explain what I mean by no natural body movement. When a person turns to walk away, there's a certain shift in weight, a rotation of the shoulders, a natural human quality to the motion. This didn't have that. It turned the way a cardboard cutout would turn if something was rotating it from behind. Stiff and flat. I got back to camp and told myself I was reading too much into a stranger in the woods. That night, I woke up suddenly at around 2 a.m. The woods outside were dead silent, not regular nighttime quiet, completely unnaturally silent. No crickets, no wind, no distant owls, nothing. Like someone had pressed mute on the entire forest. Then I heard breathing, right outside the tent wall, slow and low and steady, like something was crouched just on the other side of the fabric. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just lay there, with every muscle in my body locked tight, one hand finding my rifle in the dark beside me. The breathing stayed there for what felt like several minutes. Then came a sound I still have difficulty describing. It was somewhere between a low hum and a groan, not loud, almost gentle, but deeply wrong in a way that made my skin pull tight all over my body. It didn't sound like any animal I have ever encountered in all my years in the woods, and I have encountered plenty. Then silence again, and then very slowly the normal sounds of the forest came creeping back. Crickets first, then wind. Like whatever had been outside had moved far enough away that the world felt safe making noise again. I did not sleep. I lay completely still until the tent fabric began to glow grey with early morning light. Then I got up and looked at the ground outside. The dirt alongside the tent was disturbed. Not boot prints exactly. More like two long, narrow impressions side by side, as if something had been crouching or kneeling there for an extended period. The impressions faced the tent directly. Something had been kneeling outside my tent in the dark, breathing, for God knows how long. I packed up everything in under 15 minutes. Didn't eat, just moved. The trail out was 3 miles, and from the moment I started walking, I felt watched. Not the vague feeling you sometimes get in the woods. This was focused and deliberate, like a pressure on the back of my neck that didn't let up for a single step. About 1.5 miles in, I passed a large oak tree just off the right side of the trail. Something made me glance at it as I walked by. Carved into the bark at roughly eye level was a shape. Not letters, not words. Just a shape. A tall, thin figure with its arms hanging straight down at its sides. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look back. I covered the remaining 1.5 miles faster than I have ever moved through woods in my life, and I reached my truck and got in and locked the doors and sat there shaking for a few minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I filed a report with the Forest Service the next morning. The ranger listened to everything and said they'd send someone out. I followed up a week later and was told nothing had been found. About 2 months after that, I was at a sporting goods store and got talking with an older hunter who recognized the area I described. His whole demeanor changed. He told me him and his hunting partner had stopped going into that section years ago after a trip where they kept seeing a tall, thin figure standing between the trees at a distance that would disappear the moment either of them looked directly at it. I asked him about the tree. He looked at me for a long moment and then said very quietly that there wasn't just one tree like that out there. He said if you went deep enough into that section, you started finding them everywhere. He paid for his things and left without saying anything else. My name is Marcus. I'm 27. I live in eastern Tennessee and I've been hiking since college. Nothing extreme, just a regular guy who loves being out in nature for a few days at a time. I find peace in the woods, or at least I used to. This happened about 2 years ago in a remote section of the Great Smoky Mountains. Not the tourist areas with the painted markers and ranger stations, the deep interior, the kind of place that takes real effort to reach and that most people never bother with. I packed for 4 nights, told my roommate exactly where I was going, and drove out on a Wednesday morning. The first 2 days were perfect. Good hiking, good weather, good sleep. Exactly what I came out there for. Friday morning is when everything changed. I headed northwest into denser forest around 8 a.m. About 2 hours in, I smelled wood smoke. Old smoke, the kind that comes from a fire that's been burning a long time. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards ahead, I could just make out a thin grey thread rising between the branches. I figured it was another camper and adjusted my direction to give them space. Then I heard a voice, an old woman, singing softly. Not a real melody, just the same slow few notes repeated over and over. It drifted through the trees in a way that was hard to pin down. There was nothing obviously threatening about it, but something felt profoundly wrong. Too settled, too permanent, like the sound belonged to the forest rather than to someone passing through it. I decided to move away. I had taken maybe 4 steps when a voice directly behind me said, "You're heading the wrong way." I spun around. An old woman was standing 15 feet behind me, close enough to see her face clearly. I had no idea how she'd gotten that close without a single sound. She was deeply lined, white-haired, wearing heavy, dark, layered clothing that looked genuinely ancient. Not a costume, just worn down to softness like she'd had it on for decades. She was smiling at me, slow and patient, not quite reaching her eyes. I asked if she was all right. She tilted her head like the question amused her. "We're just fine," she said. "Been just fine a long time." I asked if she was camping nearby. She paused before answering. "We don't camp. We live here." Before I could respond, a man appeared from the trees to my left, just as old, moving with a slow, deliberate walk that made almost no sound on the leaves. Tall and thin, pale eyes that caught the light strangely, same heavy, dark clothing. He stopped beside her and looked at me without expression. "Found one," the woman said quietly without looking away from me. The man studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "You staying long?" Something about the way he asked it made my stomach drop. Not threatening exactly, just the way you might ask about livestock. Calm and practical and completely without warmth. I told him I was leaving the next day. He nodded slowly, like he was filing it away. "Long walk back," he said. "You should eat something before you go." The woman had already half turned, gesturing for me to follow her toward the smoke. Easy and natural, like it was already decided. I didn't move. I told them I had plenty of food and needed to keep moving. The woman turned back, and for just a second the smile slipped. What was underneath it I couldn't name, but every instinct I had screamed at me to leave. The smile returned just as quickly. "Suit yourself," she said softly. "Lots of people pass through here." I took a step back, then another. I couldn't bring myself to fully turn my back on them. They stood completely still and watched me go. silent and patient in a way that felt less like two old people and more like two things that had simply learned to look like two old people. I covered 2 hours of trail in 45 minutes, packed my camp without stopping, and hiked straight out to my car. I filed a report with the park service the next morning. The ranger listened carefully, asked me to repeat the location twice, then told me they would look into it. He also said, in a tone that was just a little too measured to be casual, that I had made a good decision not following them. I never got a follow-up call. The area was checked twice, apparently. No structures, no encampment, no any sign of anyone living out there. Nothing found. I don't know what those two people were. I don't know what would have happened if I had followed that woman toward the smoke. What I know is the way that old man looked at me was not the way a person looks at another person, and what she said. Lots of people pass through here, said with that smile, in those woods where almost nobody ever goes. That sentence hasn't left me. I don't think it ever will. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.